The hum was wrong before she was close enough to see anything. Thea Lindqvist had walked into the West Yard at 6 in the morning for 9 years. And every one of those mornings, the sound got to her before the hives did. 1,900 colonies across 4 leased quarters made a low pressure in the ear like a highway behind the trees. That morning, the pressure quit 40 yards out. She kept walking. That was the part she came back to later in the dark, more times than she wanted to. 14 lids were off. Not thrown, not broken. Stacked flat beside the row, the way a careful man stacks a thing he means to put back. Over a patch of bare dirt, the size of a kitchen floor, the bees lay in a white drift 2 inches deep, dry as chaff, and a few hundred were still turning circles on their backs. The smell gave her the rest. Not gasoline, though there was gasoline. Under it, oily and sharp and sweet, was a pressurized can of wasp spray, the same brand on the shelf above her own bench. Somebody who knew nothing about bees had come into her yard in the dark. Bees do not fly at night. They crawl. And a man with a flashlight and a can can kill a bushel of them in 90 seconds and take 40 stings doing it. The car sat between the 5th row and the 6th. A small hatchback, burned down to the frame tires gone to wire, the glass turned to sugar on the seats. At 10 feet she could still feel the heat of it. Both front doors stood open. Nobody in it, nobody near it, and no tracks in the dew but her own. Hive 9 had no frames in it at all. Where 9 sheets of drawn comb should have hung dark and heavy from 4 seasons, there were 32 flat packets wrapped in plastic and taped, each about the size of a paperback stacked in 2 rows on cardboard, cut to fit the floor of the box. Thea stood there with her veil pushed up, a hive tool in one hand and a smoker in the other, and what she thought with a clearness that shamed her later was that her season was finished. She called the county line at 1 minute after 6. The dispatcher asked if anybody was hurt, and Thea said she could not tell because she did not know where the driver of that car was, and saying it out loud made the back of her neck go cold. Then she did the thing she had done 9 times in 11 years, because her hands did it without asking her. She walked back to the honey house, pulled the state loss form out of the 2nd drawer, and filled it in at the bench with a carpenter's pencil. Yard name, date, colonies affected 14. Suspected cause, aerosol insecticide applied by hand at night. Then the 2 lines at the bottom she had always answered the same lazy way. Because in Ward County, the answer was almost always canola. Field the yard sits on, crop in bloom within flight. She wrote the northwest quarter of the Odegaard place and canola, and where it asked for the producer of record, she wrote the name off her placement agreement, Lachlan Frayne. She fed the form into the fax at 4 minutes after 6 and went out to see about the open hives. 11 days later, she understood that this was the only thing anyone did that morning that could not be taken back. The truck came up the section road at 20 minutes after 6, much too early, and it was not a cruiser. A gray, 3/4 ton, washed, no company paint. A second vehicle stopped at the section line, engine running, and never came in. The man who got out was tall and thin through the shoulders, in a black suit jacket over a plain shirt, with the collar open, field dust on his shoes, maybe 43. He came through the gate and straight into the yard, where the survivors of 14 colonies were still boiling out, in a mood no sane person walks into, and he did not put a hand up over his face, and did not slow down. He looked once at the burned car, and once into the open box. Then he did not look at either of them again all morning. "You are Halvard Lindqvist's granddaughter," he said. "He has been dead 19 years. I know when he died." A bee landed on his knuckle, and he let it walk. "Do you keep the pollen record he kept?" Of every possible sentence that one. Thea felt the ground tilt about a degree. "There is a dead man's car in my bee yard," she said, "and 32 packets of God knows what in Hive 9. And you want to ask about pollen? Since what year? You are on leased ground. Who are you?" "Since what year?" he repeated in that same flat voice, like a scale giving back a weight. 1985. My grandfather started it. My father kept it. I have kept it 9 years. She heard herself answer and could not have said why. "Where is the book?" "At the extension office in Minot." He was silent maybe a second and a half. It was the first thing all morning she would call frightening, and nothing about it was loud. "It is not," he said. Out at the section line, the second vehicle switched off, and two men got out and stood on either side of the gate, the way men stand when they have been told a number of minutes. "The county car will be here in 20 minutes, he said. "You will tell them what you found, and all of the truth, because you are a bad liar, and there is no reason to learn today. After they leave, you do not go off this ground. Not to town, not to the co-op, not to your sister in Kenmare. The bees get worked on schedule every yard, every day. And nothing leaves here. Not a frame, not a barrel, not a jar. I have 1,100 colonies staged in Ryder that have to be on the bloom in 9 days, she said, or I do not have a year. Then you will need the days, he said, so do not spend them arguing with me. Deputy Colm Osby got there at 7:10, and Hive 9 was empty. Not empty of bees. Empty. 9 frames of drawn comb, back in it, in order propolis lines matching up the way they had for 4 seasons. The cardboard gone, the packets gone, and nothing on the ground but dead bees and a scorched car with no plate, and its serial number ground off. She told Osby about the packets anyway, and watched him write it down and not believe it, and she could not blame him because she had stood there with both hands full of tools and let a strange man in a suit talk to her for 40 minutes without asking his name. He wrote it up as vandalism and an abandoned, burned vehicle. He looked at the man in the black jacket for a while, and the man looked back with no expression at all. And then Ostby drove out and the dust hung in the road a long time. Who was in that car? Thea said. A man named Tobin Aslakson, he said. He runs a coring rig out of Berthold. He is not dead yet. Yet. That is up to how the next 4 days go. For the first time he looked at her as a person and not a fixture on a piece of ground. Frayne, he said. Lachlan. She knew the name. Everyone from Minot to the Montana line knew it the way you know the name on the side of the trucks that carry your crop off your own field at harvest. Grain seed, pulse oil seed, 6 states of it on paper owned by nobody in particular. Why does a man like you care about pollen? Why would a woman care about it, he said. Answer that one first. So she answered standing in the wreck of her own yard, because when a beekeeper is asked about the work, she will talk to a fence post. A bee flies about 3 miles, she said. Every direction. She does not care whose name is on the field, she goes to whatever is open, and she comes home with the pollen packed on her legs, and the color tells you what she was on. Canola is yellow-gray, sweet clover is pale lemon. I sample 4 yards 3 times a week all season, read it under the scope, write the species and the share of the load and the date, and put a slide in the freezer with the barrel lot on it. She stopped. My grandfather did it to know where his honey came from. It is 41 years long and nobody in this county has anything like it, or has ever wanted it. Lachlan Frayne stood in her bee yard and went so still that a bee crossed the bridge of his nose, and he did not blink. Say the last part again, he said. Which part? The circle, he said. 3 miles, every direction. No matter whose name is on it. That is not a part, she said. That is just how they are. Later that morning, a heavy man in his 50s, named Oscar Bjeld, went through her honey house with 2 others, quietly, and left it neater than they found it. They read her placement agreements, opened the extraction room, and the wax closet, and the sump, looked in her truck, and in the pump shed, and never once opened the chest freezer in the corner, because 40 pounds of frozen pollen in labeled bags looks like nothing anybody wants. Under the bags in a bread sack was a canvas ledger with a broken spine and 41 years in 3 hands and 11 flat boxes of slides. At 11 that night, the hail line came through from the west, and she was outside in it. She heard it first, that freight noise, off the dark, and went out in a headlamp and a t-shirt, with cinder blocks in both arms, because a hail line takes the lids off 200 colonies in a minute and a half, and then rains into the brood, and by morning you are burning boxes. She got through 9 rows. On the 10th, a man was already ahead of her, in a soaked white shirt with the sleeves rolled, setting blocks 2 rows at a time, and taking golf ball ice across the shoulders without a sound. They worked 20 minutes, and did not speak once. When it passed and the frogs started again down in the slough, he stood in the wet grass with his shirt stuck to him, and a bee that had crawled under his collar in the dark stung him just under the jaw. He felt it happen. She watched him feel it. He did not lift his hand. "You should get that out," she said. "It keeps pumping as long as it is in you." "Where is the book?" he said. That was the whole of it for 6 days. The bees got worked on schedule. 2 men sat at the section line with the engine off. At noon, Oscar asked her the same 11 questions in a different order. And at supper, he asked them again with 2 new ones folded in. And on the 3rd day, a stranger came up the drive with a clipboard and asked where she kept her records. And she gave him her grandfather's dead answer and shut the door. And every one of those 6 days, the man in the black jacket walked the west yard alone. No veil, no gloves, no smoke. Up one row and down the next, walking like a man in a hallway, waiting for a jury. She watched from the honey house door on the 4th evening and finally understood what she was looking at. He was not fearless. His jaw was locked, there was sweat on him in 50-degree air, and every 20 steps he had to stop. He was standing in the one place on earth nobody would follow him into on purpose, because he had decided the price of what he wanted from her was that he would never once ask her to make it easier. On the 7th day, they came for the yard in daylight. Thea was out on the Odegaard quarter at 11:30, the canola, 3 days off full bloom, 7,000 acres of it, going yellow all the way to the sky. And she heard the machine before she placed it, a skid steer running hard, coming up the field road with the bucket low. It went into the 2nd row like a boot into a shelf of books. Boxes came apart in the air, lids sailed. The machine backed up and took the 3rd row, and then swung and took the 1st. And by the time she was running, the air over 400 colonies was one solid gray noise, and the driver was a shape behind glass with a shop rag over his face. She went for the smoker in the truck bed, got the burlap lit, and walked the wreck, pumping cold white smoke low across the ground. Because a rolled colony will kill anything with a heartbeat inside 20 feet, and smoke is the only word they listen to. The skid steer put its bucket down and quit. The driver had gotten a sleeveful going into the 3rd row. He came out already tearing at his shirt and ran straight into the canola, and the cloud went with him. Then the gray truck came up the field road. Lachlan Frayne got out into the middle of it. 400 rolled colonies in the air, at noon a sound like a substation, and he walked in through it in a black vest with the jacket over his arm, and by the time he reached her there were bees on him from the belt up. On the shoulders, on the collar, a moving skin of them across his back, and in his hair, and his chin was up, and his eyes were shut, and both hands hung open and empty, and he was not moving at all. She had a frame in her hand, pulled out of the wreck without thinking. Capped honey dripping into the dirt at her boots. And she held it up in front of him, inside the veil she was wearing, and he was not, and shouted at him through the mesh. "You did this. You brought this here." "Yes," he said. He said it with his eyes closed and bees on his mouth. "Turn to the page." "What page?" "4 years ago," he said. "June. This yard." The ledger was in the truck. She had put it there on the 5th night and not told him, and he had not asked again. She got it and sat down on an upended pallet in the middle of the ruin with the veil still on, and turned to a page in her father's small, slanted hand, and then to the page after it, which was in her own. "Read what is on it," he said. "Canola 81 out of 100 loads. Allcyke. Yellow sweet clover." "How much sweet clover?" 14 out of 100. She stopped. Her thumb was on the number, and she had written it herself, and she had never once looked at it. "That is wrong. Say why it is wrong." "Because sweet clover is a ditch plant," she said slowly. "It comes up on ground that got turned over and left bare, and it does not come up in a canola field, because a canola field is not bare, and because 7,000 acres of canola in bloom is the loudest thing in the county. When the crop is on, my girls do not go hunting a ditch. 14 loads in 100 means somewhere inside 3 miles of this spot, there was bare turned dirt open the fall before, enough to grow a stand." She turned the page. "It is here the next year, too, 12 in 100, and 2 years after that, 9. 3 times, he said. 1 year apart, every time." She looked up. The sun was behind him, and the cloud around him made a halo out of the light, and she could see his throat move. "What is buried on this quarter?" "That is the only question in my life I cannot answer," he said, and you are the first person who has ever been able to ask it in a way that has a number in it." The bees came off him over the next 20 minutes as she smoked the rose, and when they were off he had 11 stings on the back of the neck and 4 on the left ear, and his hand was shaking on the truck door, and he asked her a question he did not already know the answer to. "Can you make the circle smaller?" "Some." "How?" "4 yards, she said. "West here the Kenmare Road, the slough at Daylock, and Ryder. Their circles overlap, but they are not the same circle. If the sweet clover share is fat in 1 yard, and thin in the next, and gone in the third, then the stand it came off of is sitting inside the fat part and outside the thin part. You do not get a spot, you get a wedge." "How small a wedge?" "With 3 separate years of it," she said, "and every slide still in my freezer with a date on it. And if I count loads instead of trusting my own arithmetic," she rubbed her eyes with her wrist. "Small, maybe 40 acres. He looked out across the yellow north and west, at a corner where a stand of trees came down to a fence line, and she watched a man do arithmetic that cost him something. "Do it," he said, "tonight. I have 1,100 colonies in Ryder, and 6 days. They will be moved for you." "By who?" she said. "Nobody in Ward County moves bees but me. And 2 men in Berthold, and one of them will not answer my phone since Tuesday. By 81 of my trucks," he said, "which, as of an hour ago, are all coming here." She thought he was talking. Men like that talked. She found out otherwise at 4 the next morning, standing in her driveway in the cold, watching tractor trailers come up the section road with their trailers empty, headlights in the dust hoppers and reefers with 6 states of mud on the flaps, deadheading into a county the size of a thumbprint in the middle of Bloom. Oscar Bjeld stood beside her with a phone against his chest and told her, because nobody had told him not to, exactly what she was watching. 61,000 bushels of durum sitting in Culbertson, with nothing coming for it, he said. Lentils out of Regina. A canola contract in Devil's Lake with a penalty you would not believe. A shuttle in Jamestown that will sit 4 days and cost us the account. And accounts do not come back. They go to the outfit that showed up. He put the phone away. He has never done this, in 11 years, not for his own father's funeral. Then why? Ask him, Oscar said. He will not tell me. But there were 2 vehicles on the Kenmare Road last night that nobody in this county owns, sitting where they could see your gate. 2 nights after that, they got her on the road anyway. She was moving 40 colonies off the slough yard at 1 in the morning, netted and strapped alone, because she had been doing it alone from the age of 22, and a habit is a thing you keep having after it stops being safe. A water truck came out of the approach with no lights, and put her into the ditch, and the flatbed went over slow, and what she saw last before the windshield came in was 40 boxes leaving the deck in a long white cartwheel across the headlights. She was upside down in cold water 8 inches deep, with a wet net over the cab, and 40,000 bees inside it with her. Bees in the dark do not fly. They crawl. They came in through the vent and over the dash, and up her jeans, and she lay there with her seatbelt locked and did the only thing there was, which was nothing. Do not swing, do not brush, do not breathe fast. She was still doing it when the door came off, not opened, came off with a crowbar and a shoulder, and then a forearm was across her chest and a hand had the belt buckle, and she was dragged out through the water on her back. He put her in the bed of the gray truck, shut the tailgate, covered her head with his jacket, and held it down and sat on the ribbed steel with several thousand bees on him, and his arm across her shoulders, while a man she could not see drove them out. She could hear him counting under his breath in some language she had never heard, the way you count when you have to stay in a body that is being stung. At the yard, he lifted her down and then went the whole length of the truck away from her before he let himself put a hand on the fender. Stings, he said, not turning around. How many on you? 9, 10. You do not go on a road again. Then the bees do not get moved. Then they do not get moved. That is my whole year, Lachlan. I am aware of what a year is, he said, and you are not going on that road again. That truck was not there for a pollen record. A record can be burned in the ditch with the rest of it. It was there for the person who knows how to read one. She stood there with her hair full of slough water and her arms starting to swell, and understood 3 seconds before he was willing to, that she had stopped being the ground somebody stood on and become the thing itself. He kept a man on her porch after that, and a vehicle at each end of the section, He would not eat in the house. Twice she came out past 2 in the morning to find him out in the west yard in the dark, doing nothing at all. And she stopped asking him to come inside because he had started answering with silence instead of no. On the 11th day, she came back from the Kenmare yard with 60 slides and found him in her honey house with the ledger open under the bench lamp and both palms flat on the wood, reading the last 9 years of her handwriting, the way other men rate a diagnosis. And she said his name from the doorway, and he did not lift his head. "Your grandfather wrote heavy in the fall," he said. 41 years light all summer and heavy in October. Why? He drank in October, Thea said. The pen presses when you are steady. She stood next to him at the bench and reached to turn the slide box toward her, and their forearms touched from wrist to elbow. And neither moved for about 4 breaths, and she was aware of nothing else in the county. Then he took his hands off the bench and stepped back to the center of the room, arms at his sides. "When the corner is opened," he said, "you go out of here in a truck to a place I have already paid for in Montana, and it will not be a place you or I get to choose, and I will not have your address. That is not a threat, and it is not a favor. That is the arrangement." "Did I ask you for an arrangement?" "You did not ask me for any of this," he said. "That is the reason there is going to be one." Oscar was in the doorway. Lachlan said in the flat dispatch voice he used for weights and hours, "She is an instrument. Do not let anybody put a hand on the instrument," and walked out past him into the dark. And Oscar looked at the floor with the discomfort of somebody who has just watched a man lie to himself in front of a witness. It took her 4 nights at the scope to make the circle small. She did it the slow way, the only way that would hold up if anybody asked. Counting loads, instead of trusting a share she had written down in a hurry years before. 3 seasons, 4 yards. 211 slides out of the freezer, every one with a barrel lot and a date on the frosted end. Pale lemon grains, 3-lobed ridged like a little melon. Sweet clover, west yard fat. Kenmare road thin. Delac almost nothing. Ryder nothing at all. He sat across the bench from her all 4 nights and did not read and did not use a phone. He wrote what she said onto a legal pad in block capitals, like a man taking an order over a bad radio, and twice he fell asleep sitting up and came awake without a sound and asked what number they were on. On the 4th night, she put a plat map on the bench and drew the wedge in red grease pencil, then cut it with the 2nd year and the 3rd, and what was left, where the 3 overlaps met, was a shape the size of a thumbnail in the northwest corner of the Odegaard quarter, where a shelter belt of Caragana came down and died against the fence line. 2 acres, she said. There. 3 separate falls 1 year apart in that corner, and every time it grew over and went back to crop, and then it happened again. Lachlan Frayne looked at the map a long time, and then put both hands over his face. "I have farmed that corner 4 years," he said. "I have never put a spade in it. That is the only instruction I ever had about it." "From who?" "I do not know," he said, "and there were hooks in it. Hear that sentence and understand I am not being careful with you. I do not know." Then he told her at 2 that morning, sitting on a 5-gallon bucket with his elbows on his knees. He had served 3 years. Not his own. His father, Ansel Frayne, was 68 with a bad heart and a charge on him that was going to be 4 to 7. And Lachlan was 36 and useful, and it took 9 minutes at a kitchen table to decide which of them would go. He went. 11 months in, his father died in the winter greenhouse behind the home place at Delac, alone, between the tomato rows in February, and the county called it his heart, and Lachlan heard it at a phone on a wall in Bismarck with a line of men behind him. 3 weeks after the funeral, an envelope came through the prison mail with no return address and no letter in it. Just a plat map of a quarter section he did not own, a circle drawn on the northwest corner in ballpoint, and 4 words under it in block capitals. "Keep it planted." "I thought it was his," he said. "I thought my father had put somebody in the ground on that corner, which is a thing I could believe about him in 1 second, and that the last thing he ever asked me for was to grow a crop on top of it. I got out on a Tuesday. I signed the lease 31 days later. I have put 7,000 acres of canola on that ground 4 years running, insured, sprayed, sampled, photographed from orbit every 11 days, because a growing crop with a federal policy on it is the one piece of dirt in North Dakota nobody is allowed to open. And every year that corner came up bare, Thea said. Every July, he said, and every year the man who farms it filed a replant on it, and every year I signed the replant. She watched him hear his own sentence. He drove to Delax and came back at dawn with a file box and laid 3 sheets on her bench. The same form for 3 different years each for the same 2 acres in the northwest corner, each asking to reseed a spot that had failed to come, and each signed in a hard forward hand. His. 3 times, he said, I paid for the seed and the pass, and I signed a federal form to make bare ground look like a bad stand. 3 separate times 1 year apart, and I never read the acres once because I already knew what was under there, and a man who thinks he knows a thing does not read. He put a finger on the invoice stapled behind the second sheet. All 3 passes were billed by the same outfit, water well drilling and site work, out of Berthold. He does the wells on 9 of my quarters, and his machine is the only track hoe in 6 counties nobody asks paperwork of, because it is a water rig, and a water rig has a right to be standing in a field with a hole under it. Who? Thea said. His name is Rune, Lachlan said. 38. He has my father's jaw and my father's temper, and he has never once been called a Frayne inside that house. No seat, no share, not a name at Christmas. He drills water for the family that will not put his name on any paper, and he sends an invoice, and it gets paid. And that is the whole of what he was ever given. By the end of the morning, it was all standing in a row, every piece of it in plain sight for 4 years, wearing work clothes. The broker out of Minot who wrote the agreement that put 1,900 of Thea's colonies on the Odegaard quarter 4 years ago had been paid in cash by a man in a well truck. Bees make a field look busy, and beekeepers pay ground rent and run off trespassers, and can be counted on to be somewhere else at night. He had set her there as a fence. He had never imagined that a bee was a machine that writes things down. The irrigation well the farm manager ordered that spring was drilled by Rune's own crew. And it was Rune who said which corner had the water, and Rune who hired Tobin Aslickson's coring rig to log the water table because his own logger was down. At 11 feet in the 3rd hole, Tobin brought up gray clay with cloth in it and 2 chips of bone. He said nothing to anybody, took 32 vacuum bags off that hole by flashlight, and went looking for the one place in the county where nobody ever opens anything. He picked hive 9. And the 3 under the corner had come 1 a year, in order the way a man handles a thing he has to keep handling. Bernd Sunvold, 62, who filled the propane at the greenhouse, and told a man he thought was family that there had been a second set of truck tracks in the snow that February morning, going out the shelter belt and not the driveway. Marlis Teagan, 51, an adjuster who walked the corner the following July, and asked in writing why a spot with a replant on it had a stand of sweet clover in it, since sweet clover does not come out of a canola bag. Jory Kolstad, 26, who ran the auger the first night, for $400, and came back the 3rd summer wanting more. He did not need to hide them, Lachlan said at the window with the light coming up. He needed a man with a name to grow a crop over them, and put a federal policy on it and sign the paper every time the ground came up wrong. He needed a Frayne. He mailed that map 3 weeks after the funeral, and he knew exactly what I would think it was because he knew exactly what I thought my father was. 4 years, Thea said. 7,000 acres in the ground, and up again, to cover a man who was already dead. I was not protecting my father. I was standing on 3 people who found out how he actually died for the man who did it. Then he asked without turning around the only question left. How many people can prove the sweet clover? Anybody who counts the slides. Where are the slides? In my freezer, she said. And that is not the part you should be asking about. She told him about the retention samples then, and watched what it did to him. Every barrel she had shipped for 11 years went out with a lot number, and a sealed duplicate of every lot went to a laboratory in Fargo that runs residue panels for export buyers, and sat in their freezer 5 years under their number and their custody, because that is how honey is sold now. Honey holds pollen. It holds it for decades. It does not care about handwriting. So the book is not the evidence, he said slowly. The book is a map of where to look. The honey is the evidence, and it is in a building in Fargo neither of us has been inside under a number I do not control, and the day anybody tells them what to look for, they will look. She swallowed. I am telling you so you know I cannot take it back, and neither can you. He stood in the center of her honey house, and laughed once, with no humor in it at all. Satellites, he said. Policies, 6 states. A crop nobody is allowed to open. And it was already written down in a freezer in Fargo by a bug. He did not sleep after that, as far as she could tell, for 3 days. He was on the porch at 4 in the morning. He learned her queen lines and the pattern she smoked a row in, and when she came out of the extraction room at midnight, he was in the doorway with his shoulder against the frame, like a man who had decided a door was a place he lived now. On the 3rd of those days, he came in and put his hands on either side of her face in the wax smell, and looked at her long enough for her own pulse to show up in her cheeks. "The state inspector comes Friday," he said. "Yes. Because of a form you faxed at 4 minutes after 6 on the morning we met? Because 14 of my hives got sprayed. That is what the form is for. He will come with an adjuster and pull soil and tissue on a grid across the insured acres. And they will walk that corner with a probe because it is the only part of the field with a replant on it," he said. "And it is Wednesday." Rune got there first at 2:30 Thursday morning, with a track hoe on a lowboy, and a water tank truck and 3 men, and went into the northwest corner with the Karagana at his back, and the machine lights off. Alvy Reisenhauer, 19, who had run a hose on a well crew out of Berthold the summer before, had told a man he liked and trusted where the inspector was going to walk. He would carry that the rest of his life, and Thea never once brought it up to him. Lachlan went alone, which was the single stupidest act of an otherwise careful life, and Thea followed 11 minutes later on the flatbed, with 16 colonies still strapped on the deck from the rider move, because she had spent 9 days learning what he did when he decided to pay for something himself. Her headlights came over the rise onto a scene she saw whole in 1 second. The hole opened wider than anything needed to be. The tank truck backed up to it with the hatch off, a pile beside it under a tarp with a boot standing out of the edge. Lachlan down in the hole to the middle of his chest in gray clay, and the track hoe swinging its bucket back over the pit with the pins dry and screaming. Rune Frayne in the cab in a hooded sweatshirt, with the door open because it was warm. She did not think of a single clever thing. She drove the flatbed broadside to within 8 feet of the machine, climbed onto the deck, cut the strap, took the top box off the first pallet, 30 pounds of live colony, and 8 frames, and threw it through the open door of the cab. It came apart on the seat, then the second, then the third. A colony that hits a hard surface at night does not fly and does not scatter. It comes up the walls of whatever it is in. Rune Frayne had spent his whole life on that quarter, inside glass, in a cab behind a mask, with a machine always between him and everything that could touch him. He was out in 4 seconds with his arms over his head, and he made maybe 60 yards into the canola, and then the sound around him changed pitch, and he went down in the crop and stayed down. Lachlan came up out of the pit on a hand from Oscar, and one of Rune's own men who by then had made a decision about his week, and he got to Thea on the deck and pulled her flat behind the cab and held her there, while 38,000 bees decided about the rest of the field. "You came out here," he said with his mouth in her hair, and there was nothing left of his voice. "You came out here. You came out here first. If that bucket had come around while you were on this deck—" He stopped. He was shaking, and it was not the stings. "For 11 years I have been telling 6 states that nothing in me can be reached anymore. Do not ever get on a piece of ground with me again. Do not ever not get on it. I have no way to say the sentence." "You just said it," she said. Deputy Colm Ostby came in at 5:10 with 2 state cars behind him, into a field with an open pit and a tarp 3 men face down in canola, with their hands laced. A man 60 yards out, who could not be approached before sunup, when the bees went home, and a beekeeper and the biggest freight name between Minot and the Montana line, sitting on a flatbed deck against a stack of empty supers, not touching, watching the light come. They found Tobin Aslickson at 9 that morning, alive, 40 feet down an abandoned stockwell east of Berthold, on a ledge of casing with a broken hip and no water, 11 days in. They found him because Lachlan Frayne had spent 11 years reading fuel cards, and a water truck that never leaves the county had bought 200 gallons of diesel 11 days back, on a road that goes one place. Here is the part Thea could not get around, and she tried for 3 days. Her pollen record proved 3 separate diggings across 4 years, one a year which proved a pattern, which was the only thing on Earth that could put Lachlan Frayne beside all 3, instead of near 1. And the same 3 numbers proved that the man who signed 3 federal replant claims over that corner had signed them at the intervals of the burials. She could not prove the second man without hanging the first. He took it out of her hands. On the Monday before her ledger was entered anywhere, Lachlan Frayne walked into a federal building in Bismarck with a lawyer and a 9-page statement in his own block capitals saying he had held the lease 4 years under instructions never to open the northwest corner, that he had believed a body was in it, that he had signed 3 replant claims to conceal disturbed ground, and that he had never asked one question because he had not wanted the answer. He never said the word bees. He did not put her name in it anywhere. He put himself under all of it so the case would stand on a confession and not on a woman with a book. And she published the book anyway that same week, because his statement named a dead man and only her 3 numbers named the living one. It cost her what she knew it would. She certified the West Yard a total loss, which ended the placement agreement, which put 1,900 colonies on ground that would be a crime scene under federal hold for 2 seasons. She sold 600 of them to a man in Carrington in August, at the price you get in August. The ledger, 41 years and 3 hands, went into an evidence locker in Bismarck for 19 months, and she kept the record going in a spiral notebook from the drugstore in Minot, because the only unforgivable thing would be a gap. The corner came out in October, under a canvas tent, no machine at all, by hand, with trowels, for 6 days. Bern Sundvold, Marlis Tegan, Jory Kolstad, named in a newspaper in that order, with their ages and their people came from Sawyer and Ryder and Bismarck, and stood on the field road in the wind. Lachlan Frayne got life without release at 40, for 3 counts, and said nothing at any point except one thing at sentencing, which was that nobody in that family had ever said his name out loud in a room he was in, and the judge waited, and that was the whole statement. Lachlan Frayne got 22 months for what he signed and lost the freight paper, and 7,000 acres, and the home place at Des Lacs, and paid a fine that took the rest, and appealed none of it. He came up her driveway on a Thursday in September, 11 months later, at 6 in the morning, walking in from the section line in a shirt that no longer fit him. The West Yard was in grass by then, and the bees on it were 411 colonies she had built back from splits, and the hum reached him before the hives did, out at 40 yards, the way it is supposed to. She was standing in the row with 2 veils over her arm. He came to a stop in front of her, with the light coming flat across the field, and looked at the second veil for a while, and something in his face did a thing she had waited 11 months to see. "I do not need it," he said. "I know you do not," Thea said. That was the entire problem. He put it on. He got the elastic wrong, and she fixed it for him standing close, in front of an audience of nobody, and then he followed her up the row, carrying the smoker. And he never stood still to prove anything to her again. If this one kept hold of you, the next one is waiting. They get worse before they get better, and that is the point.